Hello, and welcome to Private Instrument Lessons, Strategies for Twice Exceptional Students. My name is Marlene Markard, and I've been a music educator for about a decade now. I am an instructor at the BIAAE, where I teach piano and music history. And at the BIAAE, I also serve in other roles. I'm a consultant. I'm a part-time member of the staff. And this year I'm serving as a postmaster's fellow. Over the last 10 years, I've served in numerous roles throughout Massachusetts and New York as an educator, most recently as a piano instructor at the Westwood Prodigy program in Westwood, Massachusetts. And I also own and operate my own piano studio. Throughout my career, I have encountered many twice exceptional students, and I have to say this has really become a passion for me. I find this population truly intriguing and fascinating, and I find myself on a journey with them in every lesson. So here I am to share my experience and my strategies with you. So our essential questions for today are, what is twice exceptionalism, or 2E, and how is it defined? What do twice exceptional students look like in our music lessons? And what are some strategies we can use to teach our twice exceptional students effectively? So what is twice exceptionalism and how is it defined? Well, before I show you the next slide, I'll give you a little visual of my own. So twice exceptionalism is students with disabilities, or I should say students who are twice exceptional have a disability and a gift. And when you put those together, the area that's in the middle is where twice exceptionalism resides. And you can see that very clearly in this graphic. So giftedness is a huge part of twice exceptionalism. It's helpful to understand then what giftedness means. The problem is that there's no uniform definition of giftedness. The federal government gives us a definition, and various organizations give us their definitions. And every single state has its own definition. And some states have no definitions, like Massachusetts, I'm sorry to say. So it kind of leaves us having to figure out what giftedness is by just recognizing it on our own. But I thought it would be helpful to look at the federal government's definition. So here it is. You'll notice that it talks about high achievement capability in areas such as intellectual, creative, artistic, leadership, or specific academic fields. So for me as a music educator, I will often see a student who is highly gifted in music, but may not be so gifted in other areas. In fact, one of the attributes, I think, of twice exceptional students is that they do tend to be highly gifted in one area and may even struggle in others. Most notably, in my experience, verbal skills. So it's a myth to think that giftedness is something that happens across the board. It's not. Giftedness often is highly gifted in one domain, like music, math, engineering, visual art, etc., and average or even below average in other areas. So now I'd like to take a look at twice exceptionalism. There's no definition for that either. At least there's no standard definition. There, again, you've got a federal definition. You've got multiple organizations giving you their own definitions. You've got states that some of which define twice exceptionalism, some of which don't. And so I looked to the IDEA and I looked to the Rehabilitation Act for definitions, and oddly, those are also both silent. So what is twice exceptionalism? I thought it'd be helpful to look at the US Department of Education's definition, which is this. I'll give you a few seconds to read it. And we see it's exactly where we started, right? Twice exceptionalism is people who have a disability and a gift, and that's why exceptionalism is what resides at the intersection. So twice exceptional students I find to be, as I said, particularly intriguing. because often their gift will mask their disability, and often their disability will gift their mask. So these students really often fly under the radar screen for that reason. It takes time getting to know that student to see if a student with apparent gifts also has a disability, or if a student with a disability, sometimes we make assumptions about what they can and cannot do. Sometimes those gifts emerge, and it's just really exciting to watch that happen. So what do 2E or twice exceptional students look like in our music lessons? Of course, like anybody else, there is no profile, right, for a twice exceptional student. Just like there's no profile for a typical student, there's no profile for an autistic student. We could profile each, thousands of individual students, but we don't have time to do that here. So what I thought we would do is look at two very, very different twice exceptional students that I've encountered through my teaching career. And what I wanted to remind you of is that there are no recipes, right? There's not even a recipe that we can use with the same student, because the same student will come to you in one lesson and be very focused, very engaged, very engaging, very willing to try new things. And you say, great, I had a terrific lesson with this student. And the next week, the same student comes back and they're completely different. And maybe they're feeling anxiety, maybe they're distracted, maybe they're anxious about trying new things. So these strategies, of course, are just tools that I hope you will consider using and adapting with your students as you see fit. So my first student profile here is Alex. Alex is an 8-year-old boy, profoundly gifted in math, language, and music. Here is a rare exception where I see Alex is really gifted pretty much across the board. But he also has autism and ADHD. He has perfect pitch. He takes lessons online, and he is, not surprisingly, a highly auditory learner. He is also extremely verbal, very analytical, wants to understand everything, asks lots of wonderful questions, some of which I don't always know the answers to. And he pushes me. He really pushes me, which is great, and which is why I love lessons with him. I've been teaching Alex for 4 years now at the BIAAE, and I thought it would be interesting for you to see some of the attributes that he's presented to me over the last 4 years. So I'll let you take a quick look at this. And some of the things I'd like to highlight are his perfectionism. One of the things we tend to see with gifted students is they strive for perfectionism. They demand perfectionism, not only the 10th time, but the first time. And if that doesn't happen, gifted students, typical and neurotypical like, can become very upset. I certainly see that at Alex. When he does not do something perfect the first time, he gets extremely upset. He can he can flee the lesson. He may cry, he may scream, he may just shut down and not want to continue the lesson. So perfectionism is definitely an attribute I see. He's certainly gotten better at managing it over the years, but it's still very much there, and I'm very sensitive to it. The other thing I wanted to highlight for you is that Alex loves to show me when I am wrong. Boy, does he. And at first, I was sort of annoyed by that. And then I realized, you know what, I can use this. And so I do, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Here are some other attributes I've seen in Alex over the last 4 years. And one I'd really like to bring to your attention is that he avoids looking at music as soon as humanly possible. And we'll talk about that also. Okay, so strategies I do not use to teach Alex. Why am I telling you this? Because I think this is as important as strategies I do use, right? These are some things that I've tried that didn't work. No class schedule. I do not use a class schedule with Alex. Why? Because when I first started working with him, he became extremely distracted by the schedule. He became distracted by the physical schedule when I presented it on a piece of paper, and he became equally distracted when I had it on the whiteboard. It just didn't work. The other issue with the schedule is that Alex wants to explore. He wants to ask questions. I want to answer those questions and I want to explore with him. And that schedule really confined us. It limited us, and it was anxiety inducing for him. So on the one hand, we both wanted to go over here and talk about his questions, but on the other hand, he felt compelled to keep coming back to the schedule. So we got rid of it. He never missed it. He doesn't need it. I do not sing or play anything for Alex until he has tried to sing or play it at least once on his own. Why? Because he has perfect pitch and he can replicate like the Dickens, and does. It took me about 6 or 7 weeks, so almost 2 months of lessons, for me to realize here was a perfect example of Alex, his gift masking his disability. So because he has perfect pitch and I naturally sing or play to model something for my students, I thoughtlessly just did that with Alex, and he would replicate. I would say, wow, this kid's an amazing sight reader. Except he wasn't. He didn't know how to read a note. It's just that he had amazing ear and processing ability, and he could just replicate everything. And one day I realized that that's what was happening, and so I stopped doing it. And I've now kind of pushed him to sight read, and he's become quite an accomplished reader. I'm very proud of him. But it took me a while to figure that out. I also don't give Alex movement breaks away from the keyboard. He takes lessons online. And yes, sometimes he does need to take a break, a brain break, or a keyboard playing break. But I learned the hard way that if I say, hey, Alex, we're going to take 2 minutes, go stretch, take some water, whatever it is, he may not come back. Or it may take him a long time to come back, and we've lost, half of our lesson. So I don't give him movement breaks away from the keyboard. I do still give him stationary movement breaks where we will sit on our benches and we'll move, we'll stomp, we'll clap, we'll rotate our arms, our heads, etc. So he's getting that break, but he's still in front of me on screen, and it's worked much better. So some strategies for building confidence and developing persistence. One of the things I said about Alex is he gets very upset if he doesn't do something perfect the first time. And often that means he will melt down, quit, not want to continue. So what I've learned to do is I start every lesson with a confidence building activity. This can be something, it doesn't have to be super, super simple, but it's something I know he has mastery over and that he can do well and independently. So I start with that, gets him off on a good footing, and it has been a successful strategy for him. Another thing I do is I let him teach me. So I kind of sneak him into engaging. Sometimes Alex becomes distracted. And because he's such an incredible auditory learner, when I see him kind of fiddling with his keyboard, he learns on an electric keyboard with lots of buttons and settings. When I see him going there, I will just play something on the piano that's wrong. I will deliberately play something that's wrong. Maybe it's the first 8 measures of a piece we're learning. And he'll say, Miss Marlena, that was wrong. That was wrong. You got it wrong. He gets so excited that I played it wrong. And so I say, it was? Can you show me how to do it the right way? And there he is. He's right back in the lesson. And it's sneaky, but it works. But then what's so wonderful about this is because he is so interested in understanding and explaining what he's doing, what he's learning, why things work the way they do. Often Alex will not just play it the right way, but then he'll tell me what was wrong about what I did. Or he'll say to me, what you did is you played it in a minor key, but it's really written in a major key. Or what you did is you played it in C major and it's really written in G major, or etc. He'll actually explain to me what's going on. So it's a terrific opportunity for him to show off what he knows. And it's a great way for me to also assess what he knows. in addition to getting him re-engaged in the lesson. So I love that strategy. And until he figures out this is what I'm doing, I'm going to keep using it. One day he'll be like, I'm on to you. Okay, another thing is setting incremental goals. And so I deliberately set very small goals for Alex. They're not necessarily unsophisticated. They might be complicated goals, but I make them very discreet. If we're learning a new rhythm pattern, I will set the goal, say, hey, in the next 10 minutes, our goal is to learn this pattern and to be maybe able to play the first 2 measures of the piece where this pattern appears. I make it a really small goal because I want him to attain it, right? I want to set him up for success, because if he doesn't succeed, I know that it's potentially injurious to the lesson and that he might want to just stop. So 9 times out of 10, he'll make that goal, and 9 times out of 10, he'll go way beyond. So he feels good about himself. He's like, hey, I was able to do that. That was awesome. And I did like 8 more measures. Yay. So another confidence building strategy. Another one is open-ended activities. Because Alex is afraid of failing, doesn't want to fail and wants perfection, he's often afraid of new things. So, and things that can be right or wrong. Now in music, sometimes things are right or wrong. Either the note is right or it's wrong, or the rhythm is right or it's wrong. I'm talking about classical repertoire. But there are many things in music, of course, that aren't, that are subjective. And that's the whole area of exploration that I like to open up to Alex, and where he really loves to be. He loves to see what would happen if, right? For example, what would happen if we played this piece that's written in a major key in a minor key? What would happen if we used a different chord progression, right? Other than what Mozart wrote, what if we reharmonized what Mozart wrote and we come up with our own composition, which he really enjoys doing and is extremely good at. What if we played around with different dynamics? What if we played a nocturne completely forte? How would that sound, right? So he likes to play with that, and then we can talk about it, because again, he's a very verbal learner. Strategies for engaging him. Well, we've talked about some of them, including kind of sneakily getting him re-engaged when he becomes distracted. And what would happen if. I talked earlier a little bit about physical activity. So Alex does benefit from having movement breaks. And as I said, we do those at the keyboard so that I don't lose him off in his living room, at home. We stay on the screen. Other things I do is, of course, I give him choices, and he enjoys having choices, and he's able to make decisions. So unlike other students, the next student I'll talk to you about, Alex really enjoys having his, exercising his agency. I allow him to choose pieces he wants to play. I say, hey, what are you learning in camp? What are you learning at school? What are you singing at home? And often we will take one of those songs and we'll learn them. Or I'll say, what are you interested in? He says he's learning about jazz. Hey, we'll do a jazz song. So he has a lot of direction in what happens in our lessons and what he's learning. And I think that really works well for him and keeps him engaged. And as I said, I'm prepared to go off lesson all the time. It's a vulnerable place to be, I have to say, because I don't always know where I will go. I don't always know what he's going to ask me, and I don't always know if I'll have the answers. But it keeps him more engaged, and he doesn't demand it verbally, but he demands it in terms of the questions he's asking. I can see where he wants to go and what he wants to know. So I always leave myself open to go there. And if I don't know the answer, I say, Alex, that's a really great question. And I either turn it on him and I say, well, what do you think the answer might be? Or I say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. Let me look into it and we'll talk about it next time. So either of those strategies works well too. Behavior management strategies. Almost everything I've described already in one way or another is a behavior management strategy. But one of the things that happens sometimes with Alex, as I've said, it's he gets very upset if he does not achieve perfection the first time and every time. So because he's such a verbal learner and he's incredible at math, he is something on like an 8th grade level in math, and he's 8 years old. He knows what asymptotes are. Now, I didn't know what an asymptote was until like I was in 8th grade, I think, but he knows what they are. And I said, look, we talk about the learning journey being asymptotic, so that it comes down and makes this precipitous curve upwards. And he understands that. He gets what that means. And sometimes we just talk about the learning journey itself as being something, and we trace it out together, just as I'm doing here. We'll say, Alex, sometimes when we're on a learning journey, we're learning something that's interesting, and then maybe we don't understand it so well. And then maybe we get to understand it much better, but then we go back because we want to go back. We liked it so much. We want to go back to that place, and we want to kind of review it and learn it and reinforce it, and we're not ready to go forward. And then when we do that, then we're ready to go forward. So we make up a story about what the learning journey can be, and we kind of trace it out. And in all of that, he sees sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, sometimes it's backwards, and sometimes it's really, directly forward. And because he's so cognitive, he gets it, right? So he's able to understand that. And sometimes he'll stop. If he makes a mistake and he's about to get upset, he'll say, oh, this is part of the learning journey. Some days that works for him. Some days it will not work for him. He doesn't care about the learning journey. He only cares that he got it wrong. But again, it's a tool that I can use. Okay. Last thing, and I've mentioned this about Alex, I basically insist that he sight reads. Why? Because his dad wants him to, because he himself wants to be an independent learner. He wants to be able to sit down, open a book of music, and learn how to play it. He's not always going to be able to do that orally, so he needs to be able to sight read. And he's certainly capable, so I push him on it. And the way I do it is I have him read or sing everything before I do it. And as I said, he's become an amazing reader. So I'll move on from Alex. And I'd like to talk briefly about Edward. Now, Edward could not be more different. Edward is a 14-year-old boy, profoundly musically gifted. I've been teaching him for about 4 years. He has autism with moderate to high support needs. He also takes lessons online, and he appears to be an auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learner. What Edward is not is a verbal learner. And what Edward is not is analytical, or a logical learner. He reserves his language. I think he has some language delay, but he is certainly capable of understanding instruction, and he is capable of verbal communication, but it is limited. So I'll let you read here about some of Edward's other attributes. Two of the attributes I would like to highlight here, in addition to his limited language, is he presents with very flat, rigid fingers and stiff wrists. And he can play extraordinarily even with this technique, which would generally be considered a poor technique for a pianist. You want to see rounded fingers and a flexible wrist. He plays remarkably well, but I'm trying to help him become more flexible so he can execute things more fluidly, more fluently, with more musicality, more phrasing, things like that. So we'll talk about that in a second. Edward also locks in mistakes almost instantly. And so those are two things I wanted to bring to your attention because I'm going to talk about them. So again, strategies I do not use with Edward. I do not use a reward system. I know that sounds mean, but I don't use a reward system. Why? Because when I did use a reward system, he became very distracted by that system, and he would perseverate throughout the lesson. on the reward, which for him was going to McDonald's and having French fries. So I eventually said to his dad, no, don't talk about French fries. Don't mention French fries. Let's not have a picture of French fries. No reward. And it was much better. It was much better. He didn't seem to miss it. And he was much more focused throughout the lesson. I do not ask Edward to problem solve at the keyboard. As I said, he is diametrically different from Alex. Edward right now in his learning journey does not have the processing ability or the cognitive wherewithal to really be able to problem solve. He benefits and he becomes very anxious if I ask him to figure something out. So I don't do that. Instead, I give him a very direct instruction, and he responds extremely well to that. Same thing for binary choices. Binary choices are anxiety inducing for Edward. I stay away from them. I simply say, Edward, please do this. And he goes ahead and he does it. And the same thing with no lengthy explanations. He's not as verbally inclined as Alex. He doesn't need the information. He doesn't crave or want the information, and it's overwhelming. So again, I stay very direct and very simple. And so actually I'm going to jump to this slide because the language I use with Edward is ABA language. For example, I might say to him, Edward, you first, then me. Or I might say, Edward, me first, then you, then together. And I will use the motions I'm using right here in order to animate what I'm saying. Sometimes Edward also gets stuck initiating a task. So I often have to say to him, 1, 2, 3, go. And then he knows that's his cue to go. It doesn't always work. And so often sometimes I have to say 1, 2, 3, go. And then I start playing and then he will join me. So prompts and cues like that are really helpful. And then he's independent. By the second, third, fourth measure of whatever it is we're doing, he's off and away on his own. But giving him those prompts and simple instructions is the best thing for me to do with Edward. The other thing is task analysis. As I said, sometimes he gets stuck on initiating things. If we are transitioning from an exercise, let's say, to a repertoire piece, I will give him a brief task analysis. I'll say, Edward, open your page to whatever, the sonatina. Edward, point to the second page, and I'll have him physically point. And I will do the same thing. I will model the same thing so he can see me on my camera, what I'm doing. Edward, we're going to play the second page. So I show him all the way to the end of the second page. Edward, take your left hand and prepare on the keyboard. Edward, take your right hand, prepare on the keyboard. I'll give him a minute or 30 seconds or whatever it is to prepare. And then I will say 1, 2, 3, go. So I give him that scaffolding whenever it seems like he needs it. I mentioned that Edward presents with very flat fingers and stiff wrists. And I'm trying to help him become more agile, more fluid in his playing, so he can be more musical in his playing. So we start every lesson now with a little song about rotating wrists and wiggle, 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 rotate, 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 rotate. And it's a physical warm up, but it also reminds his muscles of what I would hope for him to be doing in the lesson. And it does work for about 10 minutes. And then he reverts back to this, and then we stop and we do our song and our exercise again. And he seems to need that constant reminder. But it is helpful. 10 to 15 minutes is more than I was getting a few years ago, where it was all stiff for the entire lesson. So it has been a successful strategy for us. As I say here, Edward does benefit from having a class schedule. He likes to know what's coming next, and he likes to know when we are all done with that task. And movement breaks are also indicated for him. Edward he's a bit older, and usually he has a parent or a sibling in the lesson with him, so that person can contain him from leaving. So the physical movement breaks away from the keyboard work quite well for Edward. And I usually have a timer on that says 2 or 3 minutes, so he knows exactly what the expectation is. The last thing I want to say about Edward is, as I said, he locks in mistakes pretty much instantly. So even though he can read like the Dickens, he's an amazing sight reader. If he happens to read something incorrectly, it pretty much stays there forever. And it's very hard to get rid of it. So I deliberately sing and model before he does anything, the opposite of what I do with Alex. I will play through something very slowly, usually isolating one hand at a time with Edward. And we instantly figure out the fingering, the hand positions, everything I want him to do and think about, we do from the first attempt. Because if I try to layer any of those things on, it will be very difficult for him to have the cognitive flexibility to do that. And chances are I won't be able to get him to layer those things in or correct a mistake. So I basically engage in my version of errorless teaching. We just do it together right from the beginning, very slowly. I ask him to say the note names as he plays to ensure that what he's reading is actually what he's playing. Sometimes what I see happen is, I know he's reading those notes properly, but his hand may get in the wrong position, and all of a sudden he's playing an A instead of a G, and then everything with subsequent is wrong, and it stays there. So yeah, so I use that strategy with Edward. I think he finds it a little frustrating because he just wants to go because he knows he can, but hopefully he's understanding that now that it's something that's helping him get it right and avoid the frustration on the back end of having to fix things. So I'll end it there. Just a quick recap. Our twice exceptional students are truly exceptional, exciting, interesting, and we are on a journey with them. I hope that you will use these tools and strategies, as I said, with your own students, adapt them as you need them, use them as you need them. And I'd love to hear from you how you're using these tools and strategies, what's working for you, what isn't. If you get stuck and you want to contact me and think about a strategy together, I'm happy to chat with you or email with you. Here is my contact information. And thank you for being here with me today.